Jazz 90.1. Welcome to Jazz 90.1 University. It's our first class. So what you're watching there is a little piece of Rochester history. That was the top of the plaza from 1973. You were there. Did you see yourself in there? Oh. Or we go. So tonight we're going to talk about, in our first installment, really the amazing history of Rochester jazz and jazz in Rochester. And jazz started back in approximately 1917 or so, the turn of the century, but we've been there since the beginning of it, and it's been an amazing ride. Because you think about all the changes that we've seen in our world the past century or so, and we've been there each step of the way. Of course, with Kodak, documenting most of the things you're going to see tonight, Xerox, all the major companies, all the big restaurants. People always went out and enjoyed live music, and it always brought people together in a way that pretty much nothing has able to since. So tonight we're going to celebrate Rochester and all the amazing things about the Flower City, where the sun always shines, like today. So think about it. Last year it was estimated like 200,000 people saw the Rochester Jazz Festival. Maybe did any of you guys see any of the shows last year? Yeah, all of us did. And we were there all 9 nights, and we'll be there again. And really, what we do, essentially, we try to document it, let folks know we're here. But more importantly, it's really one of the biggest things that the city has is to let people know how amazing the city is through the Jazz Festival. We've seen businesses come here. We've seen people realize they want to move here based on this. Jazz. Who knew? Oh, we know, but people are not finding that out. So that being said, we want to again thank you for coming out tonight, and we're going to talk. This is what we talk about every day. Anyways, here at the station, but we thought might as well just let you in on the secret about why we love this music so much, as well as why we love the city so much. And people will move away, they come back. People tune in every day to us at jazz901.org. They hear the music, but also they hear little things that we don't think about, like traffic reports. They miss hearing 390, 490, 590, 104, the old can of worms. People tune in for that. They miss hearing that. So we bring that to them as well. A couple of thank yous. We want to thank the Rochester Public Library, because a lot of the photos you'll see tonight are from their historical division. So if you ever get a chance, I mean, that's just a resource that's worth its weight in gold. All the amazing pictures of Rochester, all the stories are all right there at the 3rd floor, and they just sit there all day long looking at a photo, so they were a great asset. Also, a friend of ours who grew up here in Rochester but moved away about 60 years ago, his name is Noel Cohen, and his hobby is collecting things about Rochester and the jazz clubs at Rochester, even down to the addresses of where they were. That's his hobby. So he'll come back, he lives in New Jersey, but he comes back every year, goes to the microfiche. Wow. Microfiche, and does the old film strips, and goes through and catalogs every single jazz club he can find. Yeah, that's his hobby. So, and I'll get you his website as well. So if you're looking for a show or a place you remember from days gone by, he knows about it and he was there. A couple things also I want to let you know. We've got 4 more classes of our first semester of Jazz 90.1U. In February, Otto Bruno will be talking about, if you know Otto, you know he's going to talk about, Francis Albert Sinatra during his Fedora years, the 50 years of Capitol Records. Then I'll be back in March, and we'll be doing a little preview on how to navigate the 2020 Jazz Festival and some of my must-see shows and the new venues and how to navigate it and how to get through it and how to survive it. Yeah, because we've done that a couple of times. And then we're going to finish up our final class of the semester with a throwdown of epic proportions. Billie Holiday versus Ella Fitzgerald. And your referee is Otto Bruno, so that should be, so stay tuned for that. A couple other things we want to mention. We have a Mardi Gras party, which is happening on Sadie Hawkins Day, February 29th. Technically, it's after Mardi Gras, so don't let that stop you. We're going to have a good time. It's going to be at the Barnard's Party House down the street on Maiden Lane, right next to the police station. So in case we get out of hand, we go directly to jail with our beads. Tickets for that are only $35, and it's an early show, too. It starts at 6 o'clock. So it incorporates your food, gets to the dancing. We have a costume contest. It's a lot of fun, and it goes for a great cause, us. So we want to make sure you're there as well. And then our spring listener party happens on Friday, April 3rd. That's how we'll celebrate the first week of our Jazz Appreciation Month Fund Drive. And that starts at 5 o'clock, and it'll be right here in this room, and it's, of course, free. And then our 2020 Jazz Cruise season Sales start on April 1st, so stay tuned for that, because those always sell out. I guess we should have gone into the travel and tourism business, because yeah, every single cruise we've ever done have sold out like that. So, and to learn more about who will be playing on those cruises, just go online to jazz901.org. So, as we talk about Rochester and its amazing history, I tend to take it for granted that the city has done so much for this music, because we've always been here. But you go to another city, I will ask, where's the jazz club? What jazz club? Where's the jazz station here? What jazz station here? Rochester is the only city in America with not one, but two 24-hour jazz stations. The only city in America. The reason why that is my boss, who hired me when I was a teenager, his name is Lee Rust, and there's an old joke in jazz. How do you become a millionaire in jazz? Start with two. He literally did that. He inherited a large sum of money, so he started a second station, WJZR. So, how do you become a millionaire in jazz? You start with two, and he's living proof. But he's still there. He's celebrating his 30th anniversary this year, so that's why we're here, because of your support. Now, when you think about places like the old Round Town, did anybody go there back in the day on Jefferson Road? You remember that one? Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a moment, of some of the old-time classic clubs, but that's one of the few shots of inside the old Round Towner, the Monticello. And you might remember that lady in the corner right there, Mary McPartland. And now she's obviously from England, and she never lived in Rochester, but we are literally standing here because of her. Twice. Back in 1972, she did a series of shows here in Rochester that gave us the seed money to become WGMC. So she came here and played for kids, raised money for our first transmitter, and helped us get on the air way back in the early 1970s. Then, fast forward about 40 years later, we were having a tough time making our pledge drive goal. So out of nowhere, a phone call from an elderly British woman, and I'm like, she says she's Mary McPartland. I'm like, yeah, right. And then she says, yeah, my manager told me you were struggling, so here's what you need. Now, she was on a rival station, XXI. She had her show still going on NPR, but she heard about our plight, called us, and made the donation. At the time, she was in her 90s. Then we talked and took the information, and I hung up. But I forgot to say thank you, so I called her back to thank her. And she yelled at me for thanking her. Then hung up the phone on me. So there we go. But Mary McPartland, a groundbreaking individual in the history of jazz in this city as well, just because of what she did. Also having one of the first all-female bands that toured around the country. And that was right here live at the old Monticello back around circa 1976 when that shot was taken. So really, again, being on the forefront of civil rights, as well as civil unrest. Back in July of 1964, a couple of things happened. One, my parents moved to Rochester. My dad moved to Rochester. July 19th, 1964. 8 days later, that happened. So my dad met the girl across the street, which would become my mom and his wife. But his first weekend here in the city, that happened. And then my grandparents literally were starting to pack their clothes and pack everything. They unpacked and they're ready to pack and move back to Georgia, realizing they thought they're coming to a better life, and literally walked into that. So that being said, what brought the city back together again was jazz. So if you look here real closely, you'll see this is Clarissa Street, and that was also the home of the Python. So if you know anything about Rochester, that area was completely razed through the riot and eventually through other things. But guess what? Not a touch, not a scratch, not even a broken window. The jazz club, the Python. As if nothing happened, like it was a blind spot to it. That's how much people appreciated the music and cared about the music and about the club that helped the music, the old Python. So again, it talks about the city and the love of the arts that we have, especially with jazz. So I thought that was interesting, seeing it through the chaos that was there, and it survived the chaos. So again, when we talk about Rochester and his love affair of jazz, and again, it's amazing to see what it's gone through and what it's been able to overcome. So for example, even with civil unrest, this is the day after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. Obviously, a period of extreme turmoil, but outside of the jazz club, the old Chef's Paradise, there's a march. It was a silent march. So, something you wouldn't see today, but people marched, they mourned, but with respect to what was around it, the jazz club. So you think about that, and what makes a jazz club important? What makes Rochester important? and special is because generally I think, unlike most cities that are a jazz club, there's either usually at the center, downtown, but not in Rochester. Throughout its long history, there have been clubs on the west side in Greece, east side, and of course downtown. Think about the west side, Doug Duke's in the early 1970s, where folks might remember that place. The Breakers out by in Charlotte, Manitou Road, or for some folks might remember the old Mardi Gras on Lake Avenue. It's been a number of things since then. Let's get back to the Mardi Gras again. But you'll get world talent. Duke Ellington would stay here, Count Basie. And in those days, back in the 50s, people just didn't do like a one-night stand and move on like we see today. They actually would stay here for a whole week. 3 shows a night, 6 days a week. Think about that for a moment. Miles Davis would play here for an entire week with John Coltrane. And so again, we also have the one-nighters, but these are major established all-stars. Ahmad Jamal, Oscar Peterson. So they planted roots here. So when they came to town, it wasn't just play their show and move on. They actually would develop friendships and relationships, come back time and time and time again. And one of the last folks who did that is coming back to this year's Jazz Festival, Monty Alexander. So he still remembers, and he still has friends to this very day. He met almost 50 years ago. So really, that's what makes Rochester really special to us. And we take it for granted, but we shouldn't, because think about the things that we have here. So for example, some of the clubs I mentioned before. This is the old Joseph Avenue. And right here, it's one of the first jazz clubs of Rochester. It's called the Cotton Club. Way back when. So that was shot back in 1955, looking at the car right there, the old T-Bird from the 50s. It gives you an idea. Like I said, with jazz clubs, what made it special was there were no walls. Everyone was welcome, especially in the 50s where there were lots of walls, and a lot of people were not welcome because of, you name the factors, except in the world of jazz and jazz clubs. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. If you loved the music, that was your admission. You were in. You could sit next to someone in a bar or at a table, not know them, and walk away with a friend for life. Based on what? The music. And really, we could use that today. But we have it today still because of jazz. That's why we have things like this. I also wanted to highlight some of the other spots. In addition to the Cotton Club, back in the 50s, there was a popular spot called Squeezers, or the Bandbox on Lake Avenue, State Street, right by Kodak, State Street Kodak. And you'd hear people like Mel Torme, or Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, Clifford Brown, Sonny Rollins, 6 nights a week on State Street, once upon a time. And what's amazing about that place, now, one of the reasons why Joe Squeezer retired from it, because he also stumbled on another business venture you may have heard of called off-track betting. So, yeah. He should have, but the horses had to, call louder. Another famous spot in Rochester's jazz history, this is this little room. It's on Lake Avenue. It's called Doug Duke's. And now it's the post office on Lake Avenue. But once upon a time, it was a pretty raucous place from 1966 to about 1973 or 74. What was interesting about this place is that you see the organ in the front of the room, but it would rise up like the old days, the old movie theater days, with the hydraulics. So the show would start, and Doug Duke was his club, had an organ, he was an organist, and would come up and introduce the folks by coming out that way. So it'd be like that.
Sure, is this by Charlotte?
Yeah, that's in Charlotte. Yep, that's right in Charlotte. So if you go to the post office in Charlotte, it was an old jazz club called Doug Duke's. And that's where Steve Gadd really got his first start. They would have, again, entertainment 6 nights a week. Pretty amazing. He also had one of the first jazz clubs in the country with a no talking policy. So what he would do is that everybody get their drinks ahead of time before the set would start. Then, once those drinks are served, no talking, which is unheard of, then or now. And he would actually toss, he was also the bouncer of the club, so he'd actually toss people out if people talk. And some nights he actually would close the club and toss everybody out. So there's a famous album, Mary McParland recorded one of her live albums called Interplay, and it introduced her signature to which would be called Twilight World. If you listen to it, you think it's edited, there's no talking, there's no applause. No, that was the club enforcing its policy, because now there's a live album being recorded. But it's pretty amazing. Another favorite club of mine was actually one of the first club I was ever to get into, with my dad. It's called the Red Creek. It opened back in 1970, and the owner at the time was 20 years old. Jeff Springett, who now the Park Ave Festival, the La La Festival, Party in the Park, that Jeff Springett. This was his first venture at age 20, the Red Creek, and so for nearly 20 years, he brought national talent ranging from B.B. King, Buddy Guy, Count Basie, Thad Jones. He just loved music. And I remember it was the first time I went to a club, I was about 10 years old. Because my dad would go out, and my mom, now I know this later, but I didn't realize, I just thought I was the coolest kid in the world, because I get to go to clubs with my dad. There's two reasons why. I love the music, but also, my dad, keep me out of trouble. So, it's also a good, what'd you guys do? And don't tell your mom. So the Red Creek was also found a place in my heart. So that was one of the first places I actually got into. I thought it was the coolest thing to be able to get stamped, go to the bar and order pop. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I thought every little kid should have this experience. And I was really, where are the little kids? Oh yeah. There's a reason why there are little kids are in the bars. But they let me go as long as they stayed quiet and listened to shows and listened to the music and got my popcorn. I was golden. So, but for many, many years, that was a special place. Now, Red Creek now is a McGregor's on Jefferson Road, right by RIT. But for a lot of folks, that was their first exposure to blues, to jazz, because really their clientele was RIT students for many, many years. So that was really cool to see that. Another favorite club of mine, a club I never got a chance to check out. I've heard a lot about it. Now it's a Holiday Inn next to Sticky Lips on Jefferson Road. The old Round Towner Motor Inn. For about 1967 to about 1978, 79, that was the place. The rooms I'm not so sure about, but it's the 70s, but still, you came for the shows. Where you see Monty Alexander, Junior Mance, Miriam McPartland. And again, also where Rochester's literature elite, people like Alec Wilder would hang out there, or Jack Garner, or Tom Hampson. So all the big photographers of the area. There was their gathering spot right here. Check out the local shows 5 or 6 nights a week. So the Round Towner. In Monticello, actually, Monty Alexander still talks about the Monticello to this very day, because that's really where he got a chance. His first club to really try things out in an audience who was really receptive to him, loved anything he did. So, like in the old days, as I was saying before, he was one of the last artists to stay here for a week. He'd stay here for a full week, trying out different material on a receptive audience. And so one of his albums, it's called We've Only Just Begun, was recorded right here live in Rochester. So you get to hear him experiment and try things out. It's really cool to see that and hear that. So if you get a chance, check that album out. This is the old Pit Dot. This is the center of the jazz universe here in Rochester, for that place, for that matter, a lot of places. So from 1953 to 1973, 20 years, which is a long time for any club, especially a jazz club, it did it all. And it's located on Clarissa Street in Troop, right at the corner there. And what's funny, each year during the Clarissa Street reunion, people come together, and it's a street festival. But what's really remarkable is that initially when the club closed in 1973, it was knocked down in 74, it lay dormant, still is dormant to this very day, it's a parking lot. But during the Clarissa Street reunion, what happens is this: people will come back, put their lawn chairs in the parking lot at the exact spot where they used to stay at the bar. They remember the exact spot, their spot at the bar. They'll put their lawn chair down and sit. Says about the power of the music. Now, some of the other clubs I was thinking about that, because I just don't have the time, but I thought BK's Lounge, the old blues bar, Genesee Street, that was the bar club my grandma used to sneak me into. See, my mom was very strict, very, very strict mom. Her mom, not so much. So, again, the key word being, don't tell your mom. I was like 4 or 5 years old, so she's kind of a party grandma, so we go to the club, blues club, BK Lounge, and see people like B.B. King and Bobby Blue Bland, artists like that. This is the old days where you could smoke, back in the 70s. So you have a 4-year-old or 5-year-old reeking of cigarette smoke, and you want to know what happened. Tell mom nothing. Some other popular spots of the 70s and 60s and 80s. A place called Duffy's. It's on Now it is the Marshall Street Pub, I want to say. It's on Monroe Avenue, Marshall Street, by the Owl House, by the Bug Jar. But for 2 glorious years, I don't know how they did it, but they brought in Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, B.B. King, Rossandro and Kirk. And so one of the shows got recorded with Miles Davis, and he was trying out a new band. And so it's kind of cool hearing that once upon a time, Monroe Avenue had that kind of vibe going on. Also, other classic places, the Green Dollar, Hattie's, which is still open, of course, Hi-Fi 400, J&L Lounge, Jazzberries and Milestones, of course, from the 80s and 90s, Jinx and Jones, The Jazz Hot from the 90s, you might remember that one as well, O'Brien's Lounge, the Oak Tree Lounge, Ridgecrest Inn is another special place from the 50s we'll talk about in a moment, the Shakespeare, the Showboat, Snuffy's, Stagecoach Inn, Town and Country, and of course we saw before, Top of the Plaza. And Foggy's Notion, yeah. So this is the pit dot. So there's not that many shots of inside the pit dot, and I would always ask people, why aren't there more shots of the pit dot? And all of a sudden, the same answer: we were having too much fun to stop and take a picture. Just tells you where people were back in those days. So someone actually had the wherewithal for a change to take a picture. So we're glad for that. As I mentioned about Doug Duke, the owner of Doug Duke's, we talked about him already. This is the inside of the Ridgecrest Inn in Irondequoit. And from about 1950 to about 1965, another place that had national talent, like Miles Davis, here are the Jazz Messengers, Carmen McRae, Billie Holiday, Jimmy Smith, Lee Morgan, Benny Golson. So think about this kind of talent in Irondequoit. Billie Holiday, with one of her final performances right here in Rochester, in Irondequoit, with her dog, the old Ridgecrest Inn. A lot of these shots were taken by an RT photographer by the name of Paul Hoffler, who was a student in his project. His senior project was documenting the jazz scene in Rochester. This is the spring of 1959, so you get an idea, 58, 59. Pretty cool project. As you know, Top of the Plaza we saw already with Buddy Rich. And then think about that, from the Top of the Plaza from about 1970 to 1980, of course we know for the dinners, wedding receptions. I always forget about the live jazz they had. Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson, Count Basie, Jimmy McPartlin, Mary's husband with Dixieland. And it was so popular that XXI, back in the 70s, taped a TV show called At the Top, hosted by Tom Hampson. A number of those shows are now on YouTube. So if you type in Top of the Plaza or At the Top, you might see yourself possibly if you're there back in the 70s. So it's a lot of fun. And there's a little picture of the Top of the Plaza right here, for folks who might remember those days. Maynard Ferguson, another popular mainstay at the Top of the Plaza. We'll have a clip later on tonight. So going back to the pit dot, I found this little clip from 30 years ago I want to show you, because it really gives you an idea of a couple of things. One, a lot of jazz clubs, just not in Rochester, but also around the country, back in the 60s and early 70s, you might remember, now we call it gentrification. Back in those days, they called it urban renewal. So a lot of times what would happen, and what happened with pit dot, is that the city would offer a large sum of money for a club owner or homeowner to sell to the city, and they would tear down the property. As you know what would happen next. Well, interestingly enough, the city came to Shep's Paradise and offered him a large sum of money. He declined. The building's still there. The pit dot took the money, and well, it's still a parking lot. Now, the city promised that they would move the pit dot to a new place, better surroundings, but as you know, these things sometimes take a promise from the government what may happen or may not happen. But I want you to take a clip of this, look at this. It's about a 5-minute clip. This gives you an idea of the love that people have for a club. And it was more than just a club. It was more than just the music. It was a family. And that's what Rochester is about, jazz. So I want to play this for you for a moment.
One other lasting victim of urban renewal, this corner of Troop and Clarissa Street.
Oh, sorry about that.
Street was empty 20 years ago. The lot has remained empty, but the memories of what was are still alive. Since 1989, the city has organized a reunion of the people who played and the people who paid to get into the Pithod Room. Gail Mann first heard of it when she left the Air Force in the late 50s.
My date friend said, do you like jazz? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, good, we're going over to the Pithod Club. I said, the what club? The Pithod Club.
The Pithod was a club that was started in a building that housed the Knights of Pythias and the Oddfellows. Thus the name, Pithod.
The Pithod opened July 4th, 1953, with music as a backdrop, not a focus.
At that time, I was sitting on the corner of Joseph and Kelly as a little child, listening to Jimmy Smith, who was playing at the Cotton Club, my goddaughter.
Paul Connolly, who later went on to work at and for the Pithod, says Stuart Hendricks was the first of several owners who made music the draw.
Gradually, the crowd got so big that there wasn't enough room to put people in the musicians to feel comfortable. So they started knocking out some of the woodwork and the walls and stuff and moving it further back.
By 1958, the club had a solid reputation, but only if you knew who to ask.
It had a sort of Gomashane reputation. It was well known among those who were interested in jazz.
The Gatman Joni Sextet was the Pithod's unofficial house band from 1958 until the early 60s. That's when a phone call sealed the group's first record contract.
I remember walking off the bandstand to take a telephone call in the phone booth, which was directly across from the bandstand, from Cannonball Adderley, who had heard about us through his brother Nat. Nat had stopped by the club pretty much at the behest of some people who had gone there.
There were good reasons to go see the Sextet at the Pithod, beyond Gap and his little brother Chuck. The band included Ron Carter and Larry Combs.
He's now the principal clarinetist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. How's that for a jump from the Pithod?
But over the course of years, lots of musicians jumped from the Pithod.
One of the upcoming people was George Benson, who had came there with drummer Marion Booker and an organ player named Lonnie Smith, not to be confused with Lonnie Liston Smith. It's Lonnie Smith out of Buffalo. And they combined the George Benson trio. And at that time, I think we paid them $530 a week the first time they came in. And the crowd sensed how well they were playing, and we started having an overflow crowd, so naturally George asked for a raise, which at that point was $750 a week.
Before he helped to book up-and-coming acts, Paul Connolly filled in as a union drummer at the Pithod. That wasn't always easy.
We had one guy, Muhammad Al-Abibi, that played flute. Had a guy, Rufus Harley, that played bagpipes. Sarah McLaughlin and Richard Otto that played jazz on violin.
Plenty of far more legitimate players and groups came and went. Connolly says it was the second most well-known jazz club on the East Coast, next to Birdland in New York City.
Everyone clamored to get to the Pithod Room because the atmosphere was such, the bandstand was here, the people were here. And it's like you're shaking hands with the group. They like the closeness, they like the camaraderie, they like to be able to come down off the bandstand and talk to the people.
Talk to the people who went there now, and there are no unhappy memories. Carol Evans came here via the Midwest and New York City in the mid-60s.
To see the Pithod for the first time, I was really amazed because it was a black and white club, possibly 60-40, with the white being the majority, enjoying jazz. And in most places that I had been to prior to coming to Rochester, most of the jazz clubs were plush. And the Pithod wasn't, the interior wasn't plush, yet you saw all these people just jammed in there together. And I thought it was absolutely beautiful.
Talk to the people who come to the Pithod reunions from as far away as Texas and Detroit, and you'll hear years melt away on the notes of a song or the memory of a friend.
It was like a family affair. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, and it was exciting.
Well, I see Jason at the door. talking a whole lot of stuff about getting the money to get in. And then once you get in, it was just a good, warm feeling.
There was a guy, I can't remember, see I'm old now and I can't remember his name, but he was a regular and it was always nice to come home to visit in the summertime, and I think his name was McGriff, and he would be playing and I'd say, oh, I timed this just right.
Well, actually, you know, when I think of the Pit Side, I don't think of jazz. I think of other places in Rochester as far as jazz is concerned. I thought of the Pit Side and I went there because I knew some of my friends would be there. And it would be a good time.
The Pit Side was a place where I felt the camaraderie, the food, drink, and the music. It was a place that I felt comfortable in.
But perhaps the warmest memories and biggest smiles are reserved for what used to happen on Sunday afternoons.
That was a jam session. Sunday afternoons was a jam session. And that's when your locals, even guys like Chuck Mangione at the time, it hadn't been known that well. And I went to school with Chuck and Camp. And they had been known, but they'd bring their horns, they'd get up there with the big guys, and we'd jam.
Unbelievable. All day long, you know, all day, all night. It was really, I like that better than the regular because you get local guys. You get local guys who really play good music.
There used to be one heavy set guy that came in every Sunday. He'd just walk in with a horn. You know, he was from out of town. You know he was from out of town. He'd just walk in with the horn, and he'd nod over at the bandstand, he'd get up, and he'd play. And that guy was fantastic. As soon as the jam session was over, he packed his horn, had a drink at the bar, and left. And we never knew who this guy was. He just...
Sundays and every other day came to an end when the last owner took the government's money with hopes of reopening elsewhere. The Elks Club and Chef's Paradise turned down similar offers, and they remain. The Pithot is limited to once-a-year reunions. For those who were never there, it is the only glimpse, and a distant one at that, of what brought a part of Rochester alive for 18 years.
There was a style having to do with the people that went there that was really different from any place that I know today.
It's a little story about the Pit Thought from Once Upon a Time, from an old XXI special called Remember When. So it gives you an idea that it was just more than just the music. It really was about people coming together and finding themselves through the music. Again, this is why we cherish the things that we do every day, especially at the festival. We get to see people, old friends. So the Pit Thought reunions don't happen much anymore, but during the festival, you'll see those old folks come back from all across the country, hang out, and they'll get their lawn chairs and sit down all day and all night. Start with the high school bands, always the last note is played, around 11 or so. Those are the folks, the remnants of the Pit Thought, because again, it brought people together in a way that really nothing else still does to this very day. That's why we cherish jazz clubs. Now, something about music, because obviously there's country clubs, there's rock clubs, but something about jazz clubs in particular, because you don't really hear any words, but it's about the feeling, the sound that brings people together in a way that, again, few things can in this world. So much so that people will come back, pay a lot of money to come back just to hang out. One more shot. This is Stan Getz. Ooh. I see you going. So, when you think about what we do here at the station and what we do in terms of programming music, we talk about life, and we talk about what it means to us. There's Stan. So again, Stan Getz, right before that girl from Ipanema showed up in his life, changed everything. This is recorded live in Irondequoit at the old Ridgecrest Inn.
So it's like low 1960s?
This is about 1958, 59. So he was still the sound, but he wasn't like Stan Getz yet. But again, this is again what we talk about. So another part of the story of Rochester Jazz are the people who covered the music, the journalists, the broadcasters. And they're the ones who documented this music. And you might know that guy. Now, he's known for the movies, but before the movies happened, he was writing about music. And he still does. although he's retired, sort of. So, but Jack Garner, if there's good music being heard, you will see a 6'9" guy with a bellowing laugh, the loudest applause in the room. And again, he loves the music, but he always would transmit that joy in his writing and get people out to see shows. Because as much as the music is important and great, it doesn't mean anything if people can't go out and see it. I have a reason to see it and hear it. And Jack did just that, and still does to this very day. So we can't thank Jack. Another favorite writer of mine is Ron Detsky from City Newspaper. So Ron, not as bellicose as Jack can be, but he's in his soft-spoken way, such an ardent champion for the music. So if you ever read City Newspaper or go online, that's Ron. He also has a side gig. He's also a professor at art at Nazareth, but you know. Jazz is the thing. So some of you folks are too young to remember, but once upon a time in the early 1960s on WHAM, there was a man who ruled the airwaves. His name was Bill Artis. And he had a show called Artists Against the Night out of WHAM. So think of WHAM radio, talk radio, but at midnight until 6 a.m., jazz. And in those days, 50,000 watts, his show was heard around half the country. So people from Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, Philadelphia would hear that man's voice. Think about that, coming out of Rochester. So people come to the show, or come to his show, come to the studios, and whether it be Bader Ferguson, Buddy Rich, Miles, come to Rochester, go to Wham, and hang out to hear the voice of Artists Against the Night. When Bill Artis left in 1969 to help start a station called WCMF, yeah, another guy took his place. His name, Harry Abraham. Harry Abraham was one of the most influential, distinguished disc jockeys in the history of this music. From 1969 to 1979, Harry Abraham took the legacy of Bill Artis and expanded it, and really made Rochester the place for radio and jazz. So you have, in the morning, Doc and Katie Abraham, remember those guys? No relation, by the way. And Harry, after 1973 included. And again, 50,000 watts, clear channel, and some of his shows are still like highly prized items. I have one of his shows, it's the Storm of 77, and you literally hear him track the storm. And so the show ends with the first snowflakes coming. So it's kind of cool hearing a snapshot of Harry Abraham and his style. It was very conversational. So most DJs in the 70s, you're like, hey, we got a platter for you. We don't hold a rap, the platter. He didn't do that. He was one of the first jocks to actually talk to you. In the middle of the night, he was talking to himself by himself. But he made you feel like you were right there next to him and in front of you, in front of him. So he became a legend. Harry also had a very interesting life. He left because Harry had encountered some financial difficulties, and so he decided to do something desperate. He tried robbing a bank. Yeah, being one of the most recognizable personalities in Rochester and going in without a mask, by the way. Like that. Yeah, so, anyways. So, he only got 5 years, and then he reestablished himself in Philadelphia. He became a major opera connoisseur and writer in Philadelphia. So he had passed a couple of years ago, but I was able to strike up a friendship with Harry, and he was able to help us raise funds. So people, because all of a sudden, like the last thing anybody knew from Harry is him in cuffs and being led away. So 35 years later, we found him alive and well at the time in Philadelphia, and we asked him, would you mind coming back on the radio and talking? Just kind of follow up on what happened. And he did. So it was kind of nice. So he was able to reconnect with a lot of friends from Rochester because he didn't realize how much of an impact he had made in all the years he spent here in Rochester. He just thought, you know what, just one more person, they come, they go. But people remembered him, and all of a sudden, he started getting emails and phone calls, and it was kind of cool that we were able to connect him back to Rochester, because he loved the city, because he came here as a student back in the 1960s to RIT, and then fell in love with the jazz scene here, and then just worked his way into radio, and stayed in radio, and then the next thing happened. But he had a big part in turning Rochester to Jazztown, USA, because he was always championing the city, the amazing jazz here, the Manjonis, especially Steve Gadd, Ron Carter, and all the other great musicians we're going to talk about in a moment. But really, he was a star. But the other big star in radio and television was this guy, Will Moyle. He had two careers. On television, WROC as their chief anchorman and reporter. He also had a jazz side. And that's how I knew. That's really the first voice I remember listening to on the radio was Will Moyle, hearing his shows on Sunday afternoons. And back in those days, remember the old TV guys, the local TV guys will show all the radio stuff. And I was a little boy, I'd look for Will Moyle, circle his name, and then circle the times he was on. And then I'd put the headphones on and try to pretend to be like Will Moyle, that voice of his. And then just the music he had and the things he would share. And always in his words, try to spread a little joy. And so we did that for many, many years on television. Once his TV gig ended in the mid-70s, he went full-time into radio at WXXI, among other places, all the way until his passing. But Will Moyle did so much, again, to expose friends to jazz. And again, championing the city and why Rochester is such a special place for this music. It's just more than, at the time, Kodak and Xerox and Bosch Alam. It was about jazz and supporting the arts. And that started, again, with Will Moyle being one of the primary champions. Another friend of ours was this guy, Tom Hampson. Tom was a legendary lawyer. He argued in front of the Supreme Court. He also other guy helped discover WCMF, one of his founding fathers, and a legendary jazz DJ and writer and impresario and character. If you came in earlier, you saw Buddy Rich playing at the top. That was his show he produced for many, many years, bringing world talent to Rochester, playing at the top of the class of restaurants. So if you ever go on YouTube and you're thinking you might see yourself there, and we'll conclude later on tonight with Maynard Ferguson from one of his shows, but he would introduce the show, get the artists there, and in the case of the Buddy Rich show that we saw earlier, sometimes bailing him out of jail since he was a lawyer. And before the taping, Buddy had run into some legal problems. He had gotten busted the night before in Buffalo, Niagara Falls. So the band's there, Buddy's not. Buddy's locked up. So Tom Hampson had to put aside his producer, TV host role and become a lawyer, drive to Buffalo, bail him out, set up the court date and everything, brought Buddy to the gig, then back. But Tom Hampson, again, so also he managed a number of artists, Buddy Rich, Mary McPartland, Alec Wilder, and a number of other legendary figures of Rochester back in the 60s and 70s. And so to hear his stories were just amazing because although it wasn't his field of expertise, he used to drop wills for the folks because they didn't want to pay, they didn't trust anyone else. They knew Tom. And in the case of Alec Wilder, he was a famous songwriter. His best known song is, just forgot it, the Tony Bennett song, I'll tell you in a moment. But Alec Wilder was kind of a hard fellow to get along with. And then Tom said that, well, he had to redo his will before he died. And he said, the problem, Alec, is that you have 4 people in your will and you're not speaking to 3 of them. So you may want to reevaluate things. So again, but he took care of artists like that. And that was Tom Hampson.
A lot of live recordings.
I'm sorry?
Did he do a lot of live recordings?
Tom Hampson?
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
I remember the clicking of glass.
Yep.
And the music.
He did. So what happened after Tom had moved into a nursing home, we had trained him how to do remote recording, so he couldn't drive anymore to XXI. So actually we set him up with a home studio at the nursing home. So those clicking glass you heard were actually him as he was recording a show, making it sound like a jazz club, which his house was essentially, with him enjoying a bourbon or scotch. So at this point here, we'll take a little time out because we're going to spend the next half talking about the musicians, and that's going to be a whole other side in itself. So before I go further, any questions before anything you want? Or we can save it up to the end. Well, there's coffee right here. If you want to grab some coffee, water.
Where is the Ridgecrest in Arundicoit?
The Ridgecrest in Arundicoit, I believe now is called, it's on Ridge Road by the hospital, which make it be Donuts, not Donuts to Life, but Rich Donuts, I believe, is where the Ridgecrest is. Yeah, so it's right there. Yeah.
So it's barely Arundicoit.
Huh?
Barely
Arundicoit, but yeah, they claim it.
All right, Derek, you said, you mentioned Stagecoach as a jazz club.
Yeah.
Stagecoach in the city, or there's a Stagecoach out in Webster?
Webster.
Oh, really?
That old Stagecoach, the Stagecoach, yeah. Same with Town and Country. I found out about in East Rochester, they had a club called the Town and Country that would bring in Las Vegas talent like Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Stephen Edie Gourmet. And I'm like, how did they do this? But they set it up as a Vegas style Supper Club in East Rochester. That building is still there, and I still scratch my like, how did they get him? Sammy Davis Jr. played there. I mean,
I went to a show at the Town and Country, and it had Diane Carroll.
Diane Carroll, right? So essentially, if you want a Vegas level talent for Rochester, New York prices, you go to East Rochester. So that club lasted for close to 20 years, and no one asked how do they, you know what? Who cares? Let's enjoy the music. And but that's still amazing. I still scratch my head over the artists they were able to bring in. Even Wayne Newton, if you remember him from the day.
Maybe you'll cover this later, but which do you think came first? Eastman School of Music jazz program or the jazz scene here? Because in any case, we have, I think, in all the places we've lived, we have a very sophisticated ear here for quality music.
On that note, let's take a break. We're gonna answer that. For bathrooms, you just go right out the door, turn right. There's coffee right there behind you. We'll be back here at 7 in 10 minutes, 7:25.
And that's what you get out of this.
From XX side, they had a Berlin. Somebody. That's in which Good question. I saw one of the cards once. Yeah.
I'm trying to work together, but yes, at this point.
Yeah. We're able to sort of go in here like but I don't know.
No, I just throw it Well, guys is going, I don't think he texts. I don't think he has text. So it's like, okay, so I tried to put in all the
There are a couple of clubs. There's a picture of the old Ridgecrest where you see people coming there after proms. So you see all these women dressed in like classic early 60s prom dresses, and they're going to the after party. I thought that was pretty. I'll show you a picture of that. That's yeah. What part of the word is girl? I lived near there. I lived near
yeah, that was the only person. I knew that. First time I went there was like.
My wake up person I see is high school. A couple things. Because I was in college years ago. My senior thesis was how people were come together and break down walls. So I started it's all about together. Alcohol.